Here we see the often cited, whilst ancient high technology people will point this video incessantly as if it's the only one that exists. It's an experiment with Dennis Stocks drilling with only a copper tube and a bow drill into granite to create this core. Notice that it's a dry method. He did not add water or oil to it, but then steel chisels were used to remove this granite core. It's also a tapered core as well, and we'll come back to this. This is a very important issue. The striations and the tapering, very, very important. Dry method achieves different type of striations as opposed to the lubricated or the wet method of using either water or some sort of oil. Here's the making Egyptian drill holes, lost high ancient technology by the scientists against Smith channel. They used a copper drill, but instead of using sand, they used corundum, available to the ancients as well. Lots of evidence for that, including inside core holes. But then to remove the core, they bring in, again, a steel chisel to remove this. Now, I assume that both of them have no issue with the fact that copper can be used to remove this core. The drilling was the issue, not the actual removal method in itself. Wet method, we get different striations. We'll examine this more closely. But now this is called feather and wedge. Now plug and feather, feather and wedge, a few different names attached to it, but it's really just like it's a wedge in between two pieces that split and crack open the granite. Here I chose this particular one because notice it's a wave, not just a straight line. This method can cut very complex shapes in granite. Granite lends itself to being broken along lines. Unlike limestone or sandstone, they don't like to break on the line as cleanly as what does granite. Here's a screenshot of the Giza power plant, the official Christopher Dunn website. His core experiment, and I have a lot to say about this experiment. I wouldn't even call it an experiment, but let's give the benefit of a doubt. As he drilled this granite core, and then he attempted to use, and I've got it twice there, you can see just to highlight, a copper mandrel, and bashed it in he could not remove the core with this copper tool. He then had to use a steel chisel. Now this is, the ancient Egyptians did not have steel. I had to use a steel chisel to remove his core. Therefore the idea of, even though they have to admit that the copper tube will drill in granite, now it's a added level. Well, okay then, but you can't remove it with a copper implement to remove the core. Well, bad choice of tools, bad choice of method. Any interest in ancient techniques, this would have been solved. This is a core drilled with a copper tube into black granite. Now the important part is that the core is still intact, and once you hold this up against the light, what happens? The light shines through. There is a tissue thin piece of granite holding this core to the original slab. That's how thin this is. Now I'll reverse the stone around, shine it through, and again, of course we're going to have this, but that's all that's holding this granite core together. So let's use plug and feather technique, not steel plug and feather. I'm going to use copper and wood to do this. Feather and wedge, plug and feather, but the feather or the plugs or shims, different name for this, they are copper, and I could use a copper wedge to force it open, but let's cripple ourselves a little bit and let's put in a series of wooden wedges. These are the same wedges I will recycle later. I use the same wedges multiple times. Neither the copper nor the wood is deformed. The top of the wooden wedges will be flattened out a little bit. And tap, tap, tap. I'm holding my stone hammer just there with my fingertips. This is not applying a massive amount of force. It's just about using copper and wood as the traditional masons would, and it works smart, not hard. Tap, 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 and pop, it will come out. Now, we saw earlier that it was a weak point was given to the granite. It's paper thin. Where does it break? It did not break on that paper thin edge. We'll get a better view of that in a moment. But we see around the entirety of that core there, the outside remains intact. It broke where it was told to break. This is the nature of granite.
Wow.
If you apply and listen to masons who know their craft and look into ancient techniques. Here are two other examples, and I'm recycling the wooden wedges. I made another series because I needed to be a little bit thinner, but one of these wedges I used throughout the entire all three of these separations, and neither the copper is deformed, neither the wood is deformed, only at the top where it's been hammered down because it's wood. So on the top right, that was the same diameter hole using a 1-inch pipe. On the bottom left, I have a 1.5 inch, so you can see the hole that's been removed. Top right, I'm going to remove that core, and on the bottom left, you can see where it's already been removed. This is feather and wedge. We'll look in South America in a moment, and I'll show you some of the big statues there connected to places such as Pumapunku, around the Tiwanaku. Copper and wood will pop out these cores. It's just a fact. It's not necessary to use steel at all, and if Chris Dunn failed to do it using a copper mandrel, well, that's an issue of using bad tools, using them badly, and not understanding, not paying attention to the traditional mason's techniques. He's not working smart. He's working badly with a bad choice of tools. And I could actually say a little bit more than that. That's the kind interpretation, the charitable interpretation of what happened with his failure to remove a core using copper. I, on the other hand, I did not invent this. I pay attention to the past masters in this regard. So same will happen, and then later I'll show in a moment, we'll focus on the bottom left, but copper, wood, stone hammer, tap, 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 and those cores will pop out. This is just, again, it's simply a fact. Now, it's necessary to say a steel chisel is required to pop out the core because a copper tube will drill that hole, will make that core, but they didn't have steel, therefore they couldn't pop out the cores with copper. Therefore, still some, let's hang on to this desperately that it's impossible, lost high technology, rather than look at traditional methods and the historical record and these other facts. It's actually a very sad state of affairs. So there in the top right, I've got my shims, feather and plug, feather and wedge technique in, tap, 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 and out she'll come. It's actually very simple. Now, that central wedge that I used on the top right is the same one that I'm using there on the bottom left. And again, in any moment now, so top right, it's popped out, pulled the core out. Let's pull her out. And there she is. Now we have on the bottom left, where I've tapped in two of my wedges, I put in that central wedge. Again, I'm recycling that wedge throughout all three of those experiments to remove granite cores just by using very simple, very primitive tools. And there she is, and now we'll focus on the bottom right and bring it into full screen. So there we have the copper wedges, and the copper plugs or shims and wooden wedges. I'm holding that hammer just with the tip of my fingers and tapping it down. I don't have a big handled hammer applying a massive amount of force. It's about intelligent use of materials. Even with poor materials used wisely, you can achieve a lot. You can have the best tools, and if you use them poorly, well, you're not going to pop out your core. Pop, 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 tap, 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 and there she goes. There she's out. So, and this core here is an important one to focus on because it's 1.5 inch diameter. It's a larger core, very, very similar size to core 7 or the air quotes experiment by Chris Dunn. It will examine more closely later, but it's simply just a fact. Yeah, and then now because the core is removed, you can also see that stone, that it is a very, very hard stone. You can even see all the little pieces that make it up. In the future, I had to pull This granite I got from my pond, and had to sacrifice some of these decorative stones I had there in the pond to get this thicker granite. All the other ones were done with 20 millimeter sheets I got from the stone suppliers who make granite bench tops, coffee tables, that type of stuff. But there it is, copper, wood, granite cores. It's no big deal, as Mike Haddock would say. Just a matter of paying attention to stonemasons who know these things, and well, yeah, that's it. Done, finished. So no more of this. You need steel to work granite, especially to remove cores. That's just not true.